Well, hi again, everyone. It's Rob Ryder, and it is Monday, July 24th, 2023. Today, Awol veterans return to military control. Turns out we may have been dropped from the rolls. And if you had ever looked at I'm speaking mainly to enlisted veterans, but this will apply to all veterans, officers included. But for enlisted, if you look at your DD Form 4 agreement that you have with the Armed Forces of the United States, one of the things that you agreed to is that during a time of war, you could be, your enlistment would continue until 6 months after the end of the war. Now, it doesn't, it's lowercase war. It doesn't say World War I, World War II, just war, right? And that's been defined as almost any kind of armed conflict. And we've had the war on drugs, war on terror. We had the Cold War. We're always at war, one kind of war or another. Gulf War. Unfortunately, that's our history, right? But because of that history, as a veteran, we're still in the military. And if that was the case, and we had military IDs, right, Geneva Convention Identification Cards, then we could go to the military and file charges and specifications for violations of military law and let the military decide if they have jurisdiction over the people doing it, be it an esquire, a mayor, right, the county treasurer, the judge in the court, right? They have, all these places have gold fringe flags, which is a military style of the flag of the nation. Can only be displayed indoors in certain places, and they all are tied to the military. And yet you go into court, well, there's a gold fringe flag. You go to the township hall meeting, well, there's a gold fringe flag. Governor's office has got a gold fringe flag. All the damn churches have got gold fringe flags. Well, that's because they're all under the jurisdiction of the military. So, it was important for the schemers to make sure that veterans were not seen as being in the military, and through some black magic, right, we've been dropped from the rolls. And so all veterans then that would be sitting in jail, let's say, right, I think there's close to at least 100 or more that were involved in the shenanigans on January 6th in D.C., they've all been charged by the indictment or grand jury, which is unconstitutional to do to a member of the military according to the Fifth Amendment. Right? That military must authorize surrender of a member to requesting civil authorities for civilians to have jurisdiction. And that's never happened. So, now those guys are in jail, and so what could you do? Well, so here's my plan, right? I'm starting with myself, basically, but I'm going to turn myself in. And if it seems to work, then that was what I would do with anybody else, right? If you know people in jail, then turn them in to the military as a deserter and let the military figure it out. Because we've been dropped from the rolls, although we shouldn't have been, right? That there's an error in the records and it's causing these problems, and the military will, say that the absence is authorized or at least excusable beyond your control and so forth. So I want to read an example of something that happened to somebody, and then we're going to look at the regulations that go with this stuff as far as the Army is concerned. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about the same for all the different branches. So, hey, let's get on with it. But hey, before we do that, I am Staff Sergeant Robert Allen Radlewski, U.S. Army veteran, also known as Rob Ryder. My email address is courtofrecord@AOL.com, and my YouTube channel is Rob Ryder, ROBBBRYDER. Yes, with 3 B's. So yeah, let's just look at a few things. Give me just a second. Let me do this first so that I have said it, because you may want to go download these copies yourself of these regulations. And what we're going to be looking at is Army Regulation 630-10, what has to do with absence without leave, desertion, and administration of personnel involved in civilian court proceedings. The civilian courts have to go to the military to ask permission to, charge you. And that stuff ain't happening, obviously. So apparently we're not being seen for some reason as being in the military. We need to fix that. So there's that one. And there's also this Army Regulation 190-9 having to do with absentee, deserter, apprehension program and surrender of military personnel to civilian law enforcement agencies. This, beyond apprehending absentees and deserters. What the procedure is if they're going to release somebody to the civilian courts. And so again, there's a whole bunch of people sitting up in D.C. jail right now that are veterans that should never have been there in the first place because they shouldn't be tried by the indictment of a grand jury. But in any case, this didn't happen, right? They weren't released by the military to them because the civilian court never went and asked. Anytime I've ever seen where they're supposed to put this piece of paper in about your military status into a court case and an esquire's involved, they always say that you're not, and they've gone to this particular website to get the information, but because your records have errors and omissions in it, it looks like you've been released, but you haven't. Okay, and then we'll talk a little about how do you surrender. That's of interest to me, and I'm going to start with this story here about a guy that was a deserter, got picked up, taken back in, and by the time he was done, he was retired. No longer a deserter. Now he's a retired member of the military. So, that's just a matter of stroke of a pen, special order. Somebody writes the order for whatever the situation is, and it takes care of the problem. This is how we cut the Gordian knot. We're trying to undo all this stuff that's got us into this problem. It'll never happen, right? But if we can get somebody to sign a freaking order, well, then all sorts of things can happen. And that's what we need. We need the sword to write us an order. Okay, before we get started on this, one other thing. Yeah, why this is important to all the rest of the veterans, even if you, let's say you served 3 years, got out, got a job, did your thing your whole life, right? You still have retirement coming to you. At the age of 60, you're authorized retirement. And they had been putting money into your Social Security account. And that's all covered in this Military Retirement Fund, which is the name of a fund. And this is the audited financial report. Simple enough to find. Just Google Military Retirement Fund Audit, and you'll find a copy of this. And, well, the whole thing is, I've actually done videos on this whole thing at one time, but we're not doing that today. I just want to find this one. There we go. So this is the Military Retirement Fund. This is paid military retiree money, right? It isn't rainy day money. This is retirement money that was paid to somebody, but it was deposited. It wasn't given to the retiree. Well, how much money is in there? And this is in billions of dollars, right? And so $1,382 billion is $1,382 billion. All right, so there's a retirement fund that has $1.3 trillion of uncollected retirement. Well, that's supposed to have gone to a retiree. Now, how come the retiree didn't get his money? Well, it's because there's errors and omissions in records. And so as long as it stays in this fund instead of going out to the retiree, well, now they get to invest it. And, you'll see they dispersed $70 billion. It doesn't say to who. They had $54 billion in investment income. So that means some fund manager got to take all these fees from, investing the money. Unfunded liability, normal cost, almost $40 billion in cost to run the program that only is going to pay out $80 billion. So every $2 that went out to somebody, right? Because that's the payroll. Now, whose payroll is it? Is that the payroll to the retiree? Or is that the payroll for the people running the show? I'm not really sure, but $80 billion went out as payroll, but that costs $40 billion to do. They're not very efficient, who's ever running the show, but they're making a lot of money, so they're happy with it. And that's my money. If you're a veteran, that's your money. So we got to, get their fingers out of our pie. So let's see how we might do that. Okay, so let's look at a real life situation where a real life deserter got picked up and, well, it turned out, hey, when they were done, he was no longer a deserter, he was a retiree. That's a pretty good deal. Let's see how that happened. Okay, so, this is from the Comptroller General of the United States, who has to pay out this money that's owed from the past, apparently. And it said these were the different points that were made in this particular action that happened. This is like an administrative court finding that we're looking at here from the Comptroller General. So an individual who is an absent without leave, dropped from rolls as a deserter status, is apprehended and returned to military control, and who is ordered into military hospital for inpatient treatment for a mental condition, which condition antedated his return to military control, and is restored to the roles as a service member for accountability purposes, such action may be considered as tantamount to restoring him to full duty status for pay purposes. Because as it turns out, if you're owed money from the military, you got to be in a full duty status to collect it. Or at least to put the paperwork in to make the collection. Right now, we don't have that duty status. We're dropped from the rolls. And then an individual who is absent without leave, dropped from the rolls more than 30 days, even though it's determined by medical authority that he is mentally incompetent, is not entitled to pay and allowances for the absence period unless the absence is excused as unavoidable by an officer exercising general court-martial jurisdiction. Hey, you may see this again on a frickin' test. You need to know these things, right? That if you went in and did this, well, when you leave, you want to make sure that your absence was declared unavoidable by a general court-martial jurisdiction officer. They need to say it. And if they say it was unavoidable, in other words, happened in a line of duty or, not of any fault of your own, whatever the words would be, then all that time can be considered as if you were in the military and you could be paid for it. Now, I have to tell you, they're not going to let you have a windfall, right? So if you had served for a number of years, got out, got a good job on the outside, you're not going to get this also, because they're going to say, well, how much did you make instead since you were out, and this is what you got paid. And, if you had a good civilian job, it's going to be more money. Well, they're not going to make you pay for that extra, right? They're not going to hold it against you, but they're not going to give you this other money on top of it. But what will happen is you'll get an ID card, right? This is the important stuff now. And you'll start getting paid from then on if you have retirement coming or any other. And you do have retirement coming from the military. And a kicker into your Social Security. Now, I know they stopped that back in like 2002 or something. So, but for myself, I went in 1978. And so it applies to me. From 1978 to 2002, the military is kicking in an extra $100 a month into your Social Security account. Okay, in the absence of court-martial conviction and sentence, which includes forfeiture of accrued but unpaid pay and allowances, right? Unpaid pay, that could be retiree pay. Could be basic pay, all sorts of pay. Allowances, right, for rations and housing. You would still have all those things if you had stayed in the military. But, because we got dropped from the rolls, well, they were still accruing them. Now it's just a matter if you're going to get paid them or not. Okay, so that which accrues but is unpaid at the time member enters an absence without leave status may be paid following his return to military control. May be paid following his return to military control. Right, so you get return to military control, there's a chance you're going to get paid. But if you made a bunch of money already as a civilian, well, then you're not going to get it. But if you didn't do so well and, that pay would have been more, well, then they're going to give it to you. Hang on a second, please. And anyway, the action they took was a response to a letter from an esquire about some guy, Darby, right, Myers Darby, concerning his entitlement pay and allowances believed due between January 1st, 1969 and February 1976. So what happened? The record of the member's case shows that he was inducted into the United States Army on February 9th, 1967 for a 24-month tour of duty, with normal expiration of his tour of duty being February 8th, 1969. On January 10th, 1969, the member was reported to be Awol. Right, so a month before he's supposed to get out, he gets reported as Awol status. And on February 14th, 1969, 30 plus days later, was dropped from the rolls as a deserter. That status remained until he was apprehended by civil authorities and returned to military control at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, May 9, 1975. Because there was some evidence that he was mentally impaired, he was released to the Army Hospital at Fort Jackson on the same day. Okay, so by a special order, here we go, right? Let's get going with the Gordian knot cutter. Let's write an order. Dated July 9, 1975. Issued by Headquarters, United States Army Training Center, and Fort Jackson, in confirmation of verbal orders. The member was assigned to Company Area HAC Headquarters Command, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Z0027. For accountability purposes while an inpatient at the hospital. So then from May 9th, 75 to November 26, 75, the member was treated for a mental disorder, which disorder was determined to have existed for quite some time prior to his return to military control. In this connection, it was discovered that during the member's 6 years of absence, he received treatment at various Veterans Administration hospitals for the same general mental condition. So let's stop here for a second. So a guy who's, was supposed to have been a deserter had been going to the VA, and the VA never did nothing about it. But according to the military, he was a deserter. Well, how come the VA didn't know that? Apparently, there's errors in records. Right? So just because you can go to the VA doesn't mean in the military's books you're not down as off the rolls. That's the problem. They're not talking to each other. So then on August 20, 1976, an investigation of the circumstances surrounding the member's unauthorized absence was ordered. And the report of that investigation, so this would be now we're talking like, okay, well, apparently then some officer, some court martial convening officer ordered a court of inquiry to, look into the matter. An investigation of the circumstances surrounding the member's unauthorized absence was ordered. The report of that investigation, I have a high. See, this is, they asked for it the 20th, 1976, but it was dated in 1975. Is that a typo, or is that just, the cart before the horse stuff? Nevertheless, whatever those dates are, stated that the member was mentally incapacitated at the time he was dropped from the rolls as a deserter in February 1969. So before he was dropped from the rolls, they decided he was mentally incapacitated. That he had been in and out of VA hospital since early 1969. He hadn't hidden it. He'd been going there, And that the VA authorized authorities were negligent and notified military authorities that he was in their hospital facilities. Based on those findings, the report recommended that the member not be tried by court-martial for his unauthorized absence, that he be retained under medical jurisdiction for treatment, and that he be presented to the Physical Evaluation Board to determine his fitness. Okay, so then by a special order, right, here we go again, cut some more Gordian knots. Issued by Headquarters, now this is the U.S. Army Medical Department activity, Fort Jackson. The member was reassigned to Medical Holding Detachment, thereafter, based on findings of permanent disability, rated at 70%, he is retired under the provisions of 10 U.S.C. 1201 as a specialist 4 with credited 8 years, 5 days service for active duty pay purposes. Right? They took all his bad time, made it good time. However, we'll see that it wasn't quite done right because U.S. Army medical activity, Fort Jackson, may not have the same power as a general court-martial convening authority as far as what they have to say about somebody getting paid. And they said here they weren't going to court-martial him, which, if they're not going to do it, then they have to write the thing and say that, you've been excused. So, it's an excused absence. Okay, the member's pay records show that he did not receive any pay and allowances for any period between January 1st, 69 to February 13th, 1976. And for the purpose of determining members' entitlements to the periods divisible into 3 parts, the part before, the part during, the part after. And then we see that in 10 U.S.C. 972. That's what this means, right? Section 972 of Title 10 United States Code is 10 U.S.C. 972. Provides a pertinent part that an enlisted member of an armed force who deserts, is absent from his organization, state, and duty more than 1 day without proper authority, as determined by competent authority, whoever that might be, is liable after his return to full duty to serve for that period that, when added to the period that he served before his absence from duty, amounts to the term for which he enlisted or inducted. Okay, so if you enlisted for 3 years and went to Awol after 2, you'd have to come back and do 1 more year. Right, under this section right here, without the proper caveats added to it. So pertinent provisions of the Department of Defense regulations, which implement 10 U.S.C. 972, are contained in Department of Defense Military Pay and Allowance Entitlements Manual. That's the DoD PM. And they have a new version of that now since this went out. Let me just show it real quick. Hang on. If you searched on DoD 7000, right, 7000.14-R, you would find this financial management regulation. Military pay policy, active duty reserve pay. Undersecretary of Defense. That has comptroller. So I wonder if the comptroller is the Undersecretary of Defense. How could that be? But back to our story. So, based on the stuff in that manual, and after expiration of term of service, provides that return to military control. An absentee who surrenders, right? So you can surrender or is apprehended after his term of enlistment has expired, is not entitled to pay or allowances until he is restored to full duty status for the purpose of making good lost time. Absentee, an enlisted member whose term of enlistment or induction terminates while he is in the status of absence without leave or desertion, is not entitled to pay or allowances upon his return to military control if his return to full duty has never been effected. All right, so again, you got to make sure you return to full duty, and this is what kind of would catch all of us, I think, that an enlisted member whose term of enlistment or induction, while he is in status of absence without leave or desertion, is not entitled to pay or allowances until his return. Right, so if you were released on terminal leave, you were basically still in the military. Right, so you would have already left the military when you went on your AWOL status because you didn't come back. A lot of people's DD-214s have said that they were released on terminal leave, or that they were released to the reserves, or some other thing, but there's never anything that says you were actually left the military, because you didn't, right? There's errors in the records. So it's clearly evident from the foregoing that in order for a member who has returned to military control from AWOL DFR status after the expiration of his term of service to become entitled to pay and all and allowances thereafter, he must be returned to full duty, and that return be for the purpose of making up lost time. It's what you have to, I want to go back. This is the reason I'm going back. A, B, C. Make sure all these things are done. And, that I'm returned to full duty, return for the purpose of making up lost time. Right, because technically I'm past my enlistment. A member who's returned to military control status after expiration of his term of service to be entitled to pay and all allowances. So then continuing on, we consider several questions concerning that which constitute the restoration. So what is, basically what does this mean now? Restoration of full pay and allowance purposes in a situation where a member was returned to military control after expiration of his enlistment, where, because of manning problems at the particular installation, he could not utilize his grade, military occupational specialty years of experience. Right? So even though they had him, they couldn't use him. He doesn't fit our, in this particular case, whoever they're talking about in this case didn't fit the mold of the unit that he was returned to. So in answer to these questions, we ruled that the attainment of full duty is achieved when the appropriate military commander, either the installation commander or of the installation where the member is held, or commander of the unit to which the member is assigned, takes appropriate administrative action to assign him to useful and productive duties, so long as those duties are not inconsistent with his grade years of service. In the present case, it was evident from the record that at the time the member was returned to military control on May 9, 1975, he was in some way mentally impaired, and that because of that impairment, he required immediate medical assistance without thought given by order issuing authority to the concept that he was to make good lost time, or that he was being held for disciplinary action. It also evident that upon official assignment to the hospital, in view of his impairment, the only military duties which he could perform were those of a hospital patient. Can you imagine that? Those are official duties, to be a hospital patient, right? If you're a hospital patient, you have duties. Military hospital patient, right? And the circumstance, it is our view that the orders of July 9th, 1975, confirming verbal orders of May 9th, 1975, may be considered tantamount to appropriate administrative action restoring the member to a full duty status for the purpose of good, both medical treatment and as a member of the armed forces, and making good time lost. Right? That made the time lost good by him being put into the hospital. Restored him to status and took care of all his bad time. As to the period after the member made good the time he lost, approximately 1 month, the file shows that his condition persisted in view of the fact that no misconduct not in line of duty finding was made. Right, so that isn't what was on the record. There was no misconduct not in the line of duty. Right, so whatever happened, they're saying happened in the line of duty. Finding was made in connection with an illness that it was recommended that he be retired for physical disability, and so retired. It is our view that the member was to be regarded as retained in service for the convenience of the government until retired. Accordingly, the member is entitled to pay and allowances from May 9, 1975 to February 13, 1976. That's when they had him in the hospital, or whatever they were doing with him. So, that's what happened to him. So what do we know? So in regard with all this, in Title 37 of the United States Code, 503A from 1970, it provides that a member of the Army who is absent without leave or over leave forfeits all pay and allowances for the period of that absence unless it is excused as being unavoidable. Got to make sure that, that's what happens. You got to say it's unavoidable. Administrative determination to authorize absence when a member is in an unauthorized absence status, an administrative determination must be made to whether the absence was avoidable. If it is not excusable as unavoidable, the member, including one mentally incompetent, forfeits pay and allowances for the period of absence. This applies even though a court-martial finds the member not guilty of a charge of unauthorized absence, or when a finding of guilty has been disapproved by the reviewing authority. So in conjunction with that, Army Regulation 63-10 says that if an absence is to be reclassified from AWL to an authorized absence, or an unauthorized absence qualifies as an unavoidable absence, which may be excused, the following commanders may reclassify or excuse, right? Who can do it? If the absence exceeds 30 days, the officer exercising general court-martial jurisdiction. That's the only one that can do it. Been gone more than 30 days, you got to get it done by general court-martial jurisdiction. And we're going to see here in a little bit, that isn't what happened with this guy, right? But, and they didn't go back and fight it, so he lost out on some money. The portion of the absence which is classified as authorized will be considered duty time, even though the member was absent for the immediate Army control. They'll still pay it. Whatever you were getting paid, whatever allowances you were getting paid, you get all that stuff. Unless, as we'll see later, right, because you made a gads of money as a civilian while you were AWOL, because remember, this is all about you being AWOL, then they're not going to give it to you, and they say, well, we won't charge you for what you already got. We'll just call it even. But you still get your retirement, you get an ID card, right? You get recognized by the military, and now they won't be able to try you by indictment of a court-martial, by the indictment of a grand jury. The military would have to release you. So anytime that the civilians have you, say, look, you got to take me back to the post. They have to release me. Here's my ID card. So the extra of the morning reports, Frederick Hood shows that 1969, member officially entered AWOL, right? Just before he was getting out. He was supposed to get out sometime in February. And February 14th, he was dropped from the rolls. As a result, in order for the member to become entitled to pay and allowances for any period from January 10th, 1969 to May 9th, 1975, when he was returned to military control, official action excusing such action had to be taken by an officer exercising general court-martial jurisdiction. All right, it appears from the file that no such action was taken. Well, then go back and ask for it. Say, hey, I need the general court-martial to say that this shit was excused. I had all these doctors said it was, but you need to do it or I can't get paid. That's what we're going to see. That's the only thing that didn't happen to this poor guy. It appears in the file that no such official action is taken. And in this regard, it's noted some form that the Chief, U.S. Army Deserter Information Point, requested an opinion of the Surgeon General's office whether there was sufficient information to determine the period of absence could qualify as unavoidable. The response dated was recommended by a psychiatric consultant. The absence was considered unavoidable. By internal routing slip, the Special Action Branch of the United States Army Finance the County Center dated sometime. Such absence was administratively approved as being unavoidable. So now he's got two different people said it was unavoidable, but neither of them are general court-martial. Collateral to this action, some other form was filled out, and the Office Surgeon General has determined the period as authorized absence to be excused as avoidable. But did he do it under general court-martial jurisdiction? Right? Because the office did it, not the Surgeon General himself. The Surgeon General is the dude that has the power as a general to, convene a court-martial. So the validity of the action was questioned by our claims division, and response advised that none of the officers who purported to excuse the member's absence as being unavoidable had the authority to do so. We concur. They could. How could they say different? Well, now there's no general court martial said that it was unavoidable. General court martial convening authority, whoever that is, right? Who's the general court martial convening authority? Jurisdiction authority, and wherever you're at, that's the dude that has to do it, or lady, ma'am. So, well, that's about it. So what happened, right? So the guy ends up getting retired. As an E4 with 2 years of service, so whatever that amount is, would be whatever the base pay is. I don't know what fraction of it he gets, but he would start getting it. So, right, E4 2 years service. Now, I think even though you're retired, right, that because now we're talking about retired reserves. Well, you're still in the reserves, so every year you're going to keep, next year he'd be an E4 with 3 years service. Because now he's back in the control of the military. He's just on a retiree status. But they can call back retirees. They call back anybody they want to. Right? That's the point. If you're in, they can call you back, put your ass to work. So, well, that's what happened. I find that quite interesting, and so I'm going to try it. I'm going to turn myself in. Okay, let's look at a couple regulations for a minute. Won't try to run this too long, but, you got to know these things. You got to spend some time in the book, so you're not going to understand what's going on. So you should really download Army Regulation 630-10 if you have any interest in what I'm talking about, even if you're not in the Army, just to see what's happening, because your stuff is the same. Excuse me. Or take the time to find your own. But one of the things that's said in here, because this is the very first pages where you get too far into the book, it's already saying what the summary of this is, why we're doing this. This regulation provides procedures for verifying the military status of persons whose military records are incomplete. Well, that would be me. My DD-214 was never completed. I never signed it. And when I read the reasons that a DD-214 may not be signed, one of them is because I'm AWOL. So I say, okay, well, I get it. But beyond that, if you actually had a copy of your official records for the military, you're not going to find an order that says you've been released from the custody and control of the military. Right? They don't do that. You're a soldier for life. They're not releasing you from the custody and control of the military. In other words, dropping you from the rolls. Then you're still on the rolls. You're still in the military. You're in military for life, even as a retiree. You're one of them. So, the Provost Marshal, this proponent of this regulation, the Provost Marshal General, he's in charge of this whole shenanigans, right? At the end of the day, go to the top. So what do we have here? Absent without leave, civilian custody in a court order. Yeah, something to talk about. Incomplete military records. Yeah, I got that. Absent without leave after return to military control. These different classification procedures and corrections and personnel not previously reported. Well, I'm going to say that's me. I don't believe it's on a report anywhere that I'm AWOL. I need to tell them. So, yeah. Doesn't take long to go through this. Let's see. The Provost Marshal General will establish law enforcement policies, procedures for the military absentee deserter apprehension program and the surrender of military personnel to civilian law enforcement authorities. Now, this is the second half of that. There are policies and procedures that have to be followed for a member of the military to be surrendered to civilian law enforcement authorities. And if your loved one is now sitting in jail, a veteran, and they weren't released, per these policies and procedures, then the civilian authority has a problem. If we would go and tell the military, hey, this guy is probably AWOL. He needs to be returned to military jurisdiction. Okay, so then provide operational control of the NCIC elements of the U.S. Army Deserter Information Point. The USA DIP. That's interesting. Because, one of the things they have at, this would actually have been Fort Bragg, right? Now it's Fort Liberty, right? They have a deserter apprehension team. And they had phone numbers, but they didn't give an email address. So over the weekend, I sent an email to the public affairs office asking for an email address to get a hold of the deserter apprehension team. We'll see if they answer me today. All right, but there's a deserter apprehension team. So apparently the inspector general did what he was supposed to do. And here's another example of a deserter information point, right, under corrections with the Marines. And this one does have an email address. Right, so you think about it now. This is under corrections. Well, if you're in jail, the guys walking, through the facility, those are corrections officers. So you tell your corrections officer, if you were in jail as a veteran, that, you're away without leave, right? They need to take you back to the post. But in the meantime, if you know somebody who's in, maybe we can contact this guy and say, hey, this guy is a member of the military. He's away without leave. He's been being tried by the indictment of a grand jury, which is unconstitutional. You need to investigate. So I don't know how all the inner workings work. I just say, well, they started it. At least there appears to be things in place to use. And serve as the headquarters coordinator for civilian law enforcement agencies, civilian judicial agencies on approved request for the return, surrender, or presence of soldiers for civilian court proceedings. Now, who's supposed to do this here? That's the Provost Marshal General. Right, so guess what he did? He wrote a regulation, AR 190-9, that says how they're supposed to do that. Continuing on, we'll recommend a soldier be dropped from the rolls. We don't want that to happen. So these are just different duties of the people involved. All right, special court martial convening authority will appoint a deserter control officer with personal services to. Well, and they're going to have this guy, then this deserter control officer is going to follow you and your paperwork through the whole system to make sure everything gets done properly. Ensure coordination between law enforcement and personal administrators at all command levels when a soldier is reported as absentee or returns to military control. Army Regulation 190-9, Chapters 3-4, and 190-45, Chapter 4 provide information on Provost Marshal procedures for reporting deserters and those that RMC. What is that? Return to military control. That's what I want. I want to return to military control. Approve request to reclassify AWL to an authorized absence or excuse unauthorized absence as unavoidable when the absence did not exceed 15 days. Okay, so if it's not more than 15 or as you see, not more than 30, then there are other people that can excuse it. But once it's more than 30 days, it has to be a general court martial convening jurisdiction that does it. And that means, set up the general court martial, then go ahead and do it. Okay. Civilian custody and court order. Full report of absentee status is provided by the first receiving military authority to the installation commander. The Provost Marshal or law enforcement staff officer is also informed of the absentee status. The unit of assignment reports the soldier returned to military control and civilian confinement affected the date of confinement or restriction. Right? So if you get put in jail, like you don't show back up to work the next day and you're in the military, well, that's an unexcused absence. Right? And you're considered out of the military's control. But once, the civilians do their paperwork, right? File the report, whatever they're supposed to do. Well, then they'll say, yeah, you are in military control, in civilian confinement. But that's never happened with any of these people. They're not going to the military to say, hey, we have one of your people in jail. They're just putting them in fucking jail. That's the problem for them. And we could go into all these different kinds of letters that were supposed to have been written, as part of this process. But I'm just saying, well, they don't know that that I am missing. So I'm going to tell them. All right, drop from the roll procedures for desertion, incomplete military records. So this is where I say, this really starts fitting into me. In the absence of complete military records, for an absentee, should not delay DFR action. Drop from the rolls. Right? So just because my DD-214 wasn't fully completed shouldn't be a reason for them not to, that they couldn't drop me from the rolls, so they did. Instead of, saying, hey, we got to get this record completed, they just went ahead and dropped you from the rolls and never complete the record. And now you're no longer, seen by the military. See how easy that was? And now any pay that you have still coming to you, because technically you are in the military still, it's just the records are wrong. Right? You're still getting paid. You're still getting your allowances. All these things are going into your account. It's just because you are going to be considered missing, you're not going to get it. Okay, so and have been DFR and sent to the USA. DIP, that's where we're going to start looking into you. Research enlisted master file records, finance records, separation records, and all related personnel records to determine the absentee's military status. See, once you say, look, I'm in the military and I'm missing, well, they're going to have to go research to see if you're telling the truth. If appropriate, contact the commander of this reserve way, just make some phone calls. Then write to the next of kin. Whether an individual has valid discharge records on file with the VA, that's what they have to check on. So here's another thing, right? So who do you turn yourself into if you wanted to do this? I'm not even saying do it yet, but if this turns out, well, who could you turn yourself into? Well, one would be go to the VA and turn yourself into the VA police. Every clinic's got a VA police station, right? So, go there. I'm going to try to call one of these numbers, like at Fort Liberty there, and just see if, they'll tell me what to do, and I'll just do whatever they tell me. But I'm still looking for more information. I'm just doing this video on things I found, saying, well, ain't this some stuff? Right? Whether the individual has requested, is receiving, or has received VA benefits after the alleged desertion date. Well, I have. Right? I mean, if you're getting disability, and I should have said, that's one of the things. For the brother that they put, that was a deserter, went back in, they said that he had a 70% disability rating. And so they were going to retire him from the military. What they didn't add to that is if you have a 70% disability rating, you can get also from the VA then unemployability, which is like 100% disability payment. And now, you can have both disability from the VA and retirement. So he can also have that 70% there. And then once you have those, right, if you've been considered that, you can go to Social Security and not apply for SSDI, which requires so many quarters, but apply for SSI, which covers if you have a disability, old age, disability, and something else, and SSI, not SSDI. There's two different programs handled by the Social Security. And they always try to maneuver you to the one that's SSDI and maybe say, we don't have enough quarters. That's what I'm doing with my brother-in-law, and I can't get him to understand, Brian, you got to go and apply for this other one called SSI. But yeah, he's a damaged goods veteran, so it's really not his fault. Someday we'll get it all figured out. So absent without leave after returning to military control. Soldiers absent from a unit and return to military control at another unit are attached to the unit where they return for properly classifying the absence. Well, I'm saying the place I'm going to return to then is, this deserter apprehension team, right? So I'll be in their unit. Or can you go to the VA, or, who can you go to? We'll find out. And they got verification then, right? So all has to be verified, but before any of this shit can be verified, you have to say it happened. Or somebody has to say it happened. And you got to have enough information to identify the person we're talking about. So return to military control. Absentee and deserters are returned to military control when they, 1, surrender to military authorities. That's all you got to do. You have to surrender to military authorities. Not saying how, it doesn't say how to do that in here, but it says that's what you need to do. Or are delivered to military authorities. Are detained by civilian law enforcement authorities, and a military detainer has been placed against the individual. Well, that's what's not happening with people in jail now. They don't have a military detainer placed against them, even though they're in jail and being tried by the indictment of a grand jury, which is unconstitutional. Well, that shit wouldn't happen if the military detainer was in place. So after receiving treatment in civilian medical facilities, but cannot be immediately transferred to military facility. That'd be like going to the VA, right? Which is technically civilian. It's not in the military. And you go there for treatment, and they're not returning you, but they could have, right? So you could go there and say, well, I got treatment. I want to surrender to the military authorities. And go to the VA police station. And this chapter provides guidance for unreported AOL and deserter personnel. Well, I guess that's who I am, because no one's ever come looking for me. But I must be, because I'm not getting paid. Can't get my retirement. Veterans are going to jail for indictments by grand juries. Like there's somehow the military doesn't know we're here. Processing assets without leave. Soldiers are being processed for discharge. May be separated without physically returning to military control. Okay. Not really sure why I highlighted that. So what's the classification procedures? The unit commander informally investigates the case and decides whether disciplinary action should be taken if the soldier should be charged with lost time. So you turn yourself into the deserter information point. They look into it and decide, well, is it disciplinary action, or do we excuse it? A soldier's absence may be classified as authorized or unauthorized or authorized. Unauthorized absences are considered AOL unless excused. If not excused, the unauthorized absence is treated as time lost. An absence immediately following unauthorized leave is classified as AWOL. Well, there you are. Now, see, but this says here, it said informally investigates and decides. But that's not the same as a court-martial commuting authority investigating and deciding. They may, base their decision on what this guy said, but, you got to have the right stamp. An absence that is to be charged as leave must be approved by leave approving authority at the request of the soldier. An absence classified as authorized or reclassified as unavoidable is considered duty time, even if the individual was absent from Army control. That's a big deal. When absence is when a soldier is acquitted by a court-martial for an unauthorized absence, or reviewing authority disapproves the conviction for AWOL, the appropriate commander may charge the soldier with time lost. The acquittal or disapproval conviction affects only the disciplinary aspects of the absence. But we need a decision. Is it time lost? Is it good time? With all these Got to be properly classified with the proper stamps. Corrections. Personnel records are processed in the following manner. All excused unauthorized absence or errors in a soldier's personnel file are neatly lined through, initialed, and dated by the custodian of the military record. That would be called the cutting the Gordian knot. Just fucking one line through it, initial and date it. Well, you're no longer unauthorized absence. It's off your records. Right? A written statement by the appropriate commander excusing the unauthorized absence is filed in the soldier's personnel records as a permanent document. And then a corrected DA 31 request for process excuse, Right? So you got a little paperwork to do. Got a procedure of returning, right? Deserters restored to duty. Personnel not previously reported. When a person returned to military control were not reported AOWO, DFR, the commander managing the case prepares a form and does some stuff. Okay, well, right, so we should be seeing a DA form 4187 being produced if we go and say, I don't believe that I've been reported as AOL or DFR, but apparently I am. I want to return to the military. Okay. Mistakenly reported. All cases in which the soldier was mistakenly DFR or unit must be corrected. Unit commander responsible for erroneous report completes another form, DD Form 616. The unit that incorrectly dropped the soldier from the rolls, so forth and so on. Deserters charged or convicted of a civilian offense are restricted by court order. When a deserter is in civilian custody, the nearest installation provost marshal and deserter control officer are notified. Oh, really? The provost marshal and deserter control officer verifies individual status with chief, a USA DIP, places a detainer against a soldier with the civilian authorities, notifies parent unit, commander, soldier status. Well, none of that's happening. If a deserter is restricted to court authority from leaving the area due to civilian court or criminal proceeding, the nearest installation provost marshal informs the parent installation provost marshal and deserter control officer of the soldier status. Well, let's make them do it. This is why, somebody in jail, we got to go turn them in to the military. Claim they're a deserter. Make them check it out. And they're going to go and say, well, this really isn't a civilian court. Who are these people? Because, I don't know, if people who have not watched many of my videos, you need to understand, I've looked at all sorts of court cases, and it's really easy to see that everything they do is a simulated legal process done under color of law. It has nothing to do with what the law says or what the Constitution says. We've been invaded by esquires, which are technically foreign agents or agents of the crown. An esquire back in the day was the shield holder of the person with the title of nobility, like a knight. Right? So an esquire is not a title of nobility, but it is the title of an agent of the crown. But it's not a member of somebody who's within the crown. Anyways, so yeah, there's just errors and records and stuff, and we let them get away with it, and we find ourselves in the situation we are today. And mobilizing Army National Guard of the United States Army Reserve, when mobilization occurs when there is a national emergency declared by the President or Congress. And then these Army, National Guard, United States, and United States Army absentee in the following categories fail to report to active duty on mobilization must be identified and reported. That goes through. So you could easily be in one of these groups here, and you missed your mobilization record, and now you're dropped from the rolls. Because we're always in a national emergency. Always. That's how they're running the country now. Everything's done by emergency orders. Okay, then we got an overview. What was this? Okay. Surrender to civilian law enforcement officials. This chapter establishes procedures and policies for surrender of military personnel to civilian authorities. And this is based on Article 14 of the UCMJ, which talks about delivery of offenders to civil court authorities, where under such regulations, the Secretary concerned may prescribe a member of the armed forces accused of an offense against the civil authority may be delivered upon request to the civil authority for trial. So you can be tried by civil authority, but they have to request you, and this is how they're supposed to do it. Right? And, it ain't happening. Don't have time to read it all. If you want to read it for yourself, well, download AR 190. Excuse me, this is AR 630-10. Army Regulations 630-10. Well, we got to move on. Let's quickly. So this is a military police absentee deserter apprehension program and surrender of military personnel to civilian law enforcement agencies. This implements the things that have to be done for, to surrender the military member to the civilian authorities and also to return to military control, which is what we're trying to do, be returned to military control. And the one responsible is the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Right? He's establishing personnel policy for reporting and returning deserters to military control to physical officers, the Army National Guard. I don't really understand that way that's written. But deserters to military control, there's no comma, and to physical officers of the Army National Guard. Well, whatever it takes, do whatever you got to do, because, I'm still sitting here waiting to be cleared of all charges. We got installation provost marshals involved, receiving the criminal complaint of the offenses of absence without leave and desertion. Okay, so the installation provost marshal / directors of emergency services. Now, who is a director of emergency services? Well, that's like going through Homeland Security. It's like your sheriff's office. It has the sheriff's office. It has a director of emergency services. So is that the, local provost marshal? Is Kent County an installation, in one jurisdiction and a civilian jurisdiction in another jurisdiction? I don't know. We're going to find out. Receiving criminal complaint, right? So this is where you'd say, hey, there's a deserter, and turn them in. And then they got to do their thing and, send it to the U.S. Army Deserter Information Point to be checked out. And then we got here who meet the criteria for immediate classification as deserter. Procedures for entering local deserter warrant are located in this code. For additional assistance, contact these people or email these people. Well, I'm going to email these people here before the day is over. The Provost Marshal General is responsible for establishing law enforcement policy and procedures for military absentee and deserter apprehension program. The Provost Marshal General he's got a lot of things he's supposed to do. I'm sure he's done them, so we can just go by that and say, okay, now what do we do with what the man did? Well, absent without leave reporting. A unit commander will notify the installation PMO DES desk sergeant within 48 hours after a soldier has been identified as AWOL. Well, how's that going to happen? You're going to tell them, this soldier is AWOL. Right? So you got to be able to identify the soldier and say he's AWOL. Report any soldier as deserter who meets the criteria described in Appendix B or Appendix C, or when information indicates the absentee's intent to permanently absent himself or herself from the unit or place of duty. Then you got deserter reporting. I believe the difference between AWOL, and deserter is a matter of 30 days, right? You're AWOL for 30 days, and then you're a deserter. So by and large, for people like me, we're all considered deserters. The unit commander will immediately report an absentee as a deserter to the DCO and to these other people on this form when one of them more applies, right? A, B, C, as long as these things apply. The soldier without authority has gone to or remains in a foreign country. Soldier remains absent for 30 consecutive days and is administratively dropped from the rolls by means of this form right here. DA Form 4187, personal action, will drop you from the rolls. So do we have one of those in a record that has something to do with us? Special category absentee reporting, right? So this is what this desk sergeant, right? Now this is what a non-commissioned officer has to do. He's responsible to do all these things. He's got to notify the USAC, IDC. He's got to query the FBI, NCIC, missing persons, all these indexes. He's got to enter the soldier into the system, request the assistance of the director in obtaining pertinent information from security records maintained by other federal agencies. So in other words, he's got a hammer to get done whatever he needs done. Request assistance by the U.S. Department of State. He's got another hammer. He can get the State Department involved. Request assistance, the nearest Air Force Special Investigations Branch to determine if absentee has been granted passage on U.S. Air Force Air Mobility Command flight. Transmit all electronic alert through National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System to broadcast within the state, specific state, regional broadcast, contiguous 5 states. The message must indicate the deserter's complete name, social security number, date. Oh, we're going to make it well known. He's one of ours, so we're looking for him. Coordinate with the Office of State Staff Judge Advocate to obtain search warrants, court orders, subpoenas. Search the deserter's residence, financial, credit, all your records. They're going to know everything about you, just like everybody else does. But hey, they're going to straighten it up and put it in your favor. Ensure all reasonable and legal efforts are made to safely return the SCA soldier to military control. Now, what does SCA stand for? I got to look that up. Hang on. Yeah, an SCA is a special category absentee. All right, be special. All right, ensure all reasonable and legal efforts are made to return the special category absentee soldier to military control. Desertion under aggravated circumstances. Initiate a LEER, charging soldier with desertion as primary charge and AWOL as secondary charge. Right, so this is how you get your general court-martial proceeding to be started by somebody filing charges and specifications for AWOL and deserter. Return to military control. The criminal offense of AWOL and desertion are within the purview of these people here, PMO and DES, in accordance with this Army regulation. Investigation, documentation of criminal complaint is a law enforcement responsibility. Proactive effort by military law enforcement to physically apprehend the absentee is not generally to be committed unless the Provost Marshal determines such efforts are warranted by specific circumstances. All right, so they're not going to come knocking on your door necessarily. This does not preclude coordination with local, state, federal agencies to effect apprehension if evidence exists or is developed to indicate the absentee's location. Well, we're going to tell them where we are. And then all the things they're going to do and, verification of deserter status when a person claims to be a deserter from the Army. The first receiving military authority must advise the person of his or her rights according to UCMJ Article 31, provide as much of the following data as possible to the installation sergeant, right? Name, social security number, date of birth, home of record, date and place of enlistment, date of alleged absence. Basically, your DD-214 would have on there all that they needed to know to put you in the system. Right? How about a deserter felony checks required? Right? Full name of the person, social security number, date of birth, place of birth, military service number. Is that your DOD ID number? I guess it could be. Right? So, when necessary to establish identity at the request of the chief of the USA DIP, the installation desk sergeant will forward to this form, which is a police record check with complete set of fingerprints, to the chief, U.S. Army Deserter Information Point. In this particular building at Fort Knox, the fingerprints must be accompanied by another form in quadruplicate, because we like our paper. In the event, in item 9 of the DD form 616, and note, for information only, fingerprints attached, and so forth and so on. In the event the status of the individual cannot be immediately determined, the individual will not be detained. Surrender or apprehension of an off-Army installation. Commanders of activities not located on Army installations will notify the senior commander of Army installation, whose area responsibility includes the activity's location, and provide the installation's desk sergeant all available information on absentee or deserter. Ensure the installation PMO, desk sergeant, so forth, does his thing. Directed by absentee's commander. Absentee is not an SCA, special case. Absentee issue this other form and do some other stuff and da-da-da-da. You know, another place you might be able to turn yourself into is the armory. All right, that's where you could return yourself to military control. And then this military detainer, now this is what they're supposed to do if they're going to release you, authorized release to civilian authorities who requested you, participate in their court. A military detainer must be placed when civilian authorities are holding a soldier and release of the soldier is not imminent. The installation commander or provost marshal may initiate a detainer. The purposes for filling the detainer are to officially inform civilian authorities that an Army soldier is in their custody and military authorities want to assume custody at release. Request military authorities to provide status actions taken by the civilian authorities, right? So, we're going to try your man by the indictment of a grand jury. They can say, well, no, you're not. That's unconstitutional. We'll take him back. So, 1, 2, 3, all these things. This is good. This is what we need to happen to clear the name of a bunch of veterans that are sitting in jail in D.C. along with a bunch of other people. But, this is the wedge that opens the door that gets everybody out. Because veterans shouldn't be there because we have an exemption from being tried by the indictment of a grand jury. Has to be by charges and specifications under Article 30 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And hey, we got the use of escorts. And one of those uses is the absentee is in custody of a civilian law enforcement agency that is not willing to assist in processing the absentee by mail or similar means. So we'll come and get him. All right, that's the use of an escort. But you got to have a form. Of course, there's always a form involved. DA form 7630, Department of the Army Law Enforcement Escort Credentials. That'll get you through a bunch of doors that would otherwise be closed. And there's payment of rewards. You can get paid for turning the dude in. Doing yourself a favor, doing him a favor. A reward can be paid to an eligible person or agency who apprehends or detains an absentee or deserter until military authorities assume control. All right, so I tell my son, you're going to get a reward. I'm going to sit here until they come and say, you're the reason I'm still here, and you get the reward. Payment of reward to persons or agencies is authorized as indicated below. I wonder if I pay myself a reward. I turn myself in. Do I get rewarded for it? Maybe that's what I'll do. I want the reward money. My business, Robert Allen Retluski, right, with an EIN number, wants the money for turning in Robert Allen Retluski, the guy with the Social Security number. Outstanding. Surrender of military to civilian law enforcement officials. This chapter establishes Provost Marshal procedure and responsibility for surrender of soldiers to civilian law enforcement authorities. It all goes through the Provost Marshal. Now look at Camp Grayling. They have a Provost Marshal. I'm trying to think of places we have Provost Marshals in Michigan, right? Because we don't have a lot of military bases. But we do have Camp Grayling. It's a big, it's where the National Guard does their training at. So they got a Provost Marshal. And they probably have one at, or somebody, some form or fashion, at any unit somewhere. I have to find that out. Anyways, obviously I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to wait till I have them all to try something. I say I got enough now to call in and say, well, I believe I fit the criteria. All right, how do you surrender? Procedures for reporting asset without leave and desertion offenses. Right, which is in the Code of Federal Regulations under Title 32, so 32 CFR 635-26, which is a bunch of, it's, as you can see, it's all about filling out these forms, right? These are the forms that show that the shit's being handled in a particular manner. But the other thing is they've got to do these, initiate a reference blotter entry. All right, so we got it up here. We got an information blotter entry. Now we got a reference blotter entry. It's like there's two different entries, and it's from the Provost Marshal / right, this dude here, Director of Emergency Services. Well, I say every county has one of those people, right? That's a county office. They're they're in cahoots with Homeland Security. All right, so I'm in Kent County, Michigan, and under the Sheriff's Office, Emergency Management, and Homeland Security. Well, somebody's in charge of this thing. And so I emailed Matt Friday and said, hey, what about deserters? I don't remember exactly what I asked him. Anyways, I got an immediate response or automatic response. He wouldn't be back until sometime this week. So, but I'm just saying, well, do you contact these people and turn yourself in? Do you contact your state's National Guard office and turn yourself in? Do you go down to the local armory, turn yourself in? Do you contact the deserter apprehension team and turn yourself in? How about you contact the deserter information point and turn yourself in? The deserter information point mission is to investigate and cause the apprehension of military personnel administratively declared as deserter status, affecting their return back to their command or military jurisdiction. This doesn't say anything about just Marines. It says, that's what it's for. This deserter information point has one reason for existing: to investigate and cause the apprehension of military personnel administratively declared as deserter status, affecting their return back to command and military jurisdiction. So what do we got to do first? We got to get administratively declared as deserter status. One step from, unlocking the door. Okay, hey, this video went on a lot longer than I was planning on, but there was lots to read, and that's just the way she goes some days. So I'm going to stop now and say, I hope you found it useful if you're a veteran and could see why I'm spent so much time on this. And soon enough, I'll have tried it, and I'll report back, or I'll be in Leavenworth because I'm a deserter. I haven't. Oh, no. Okay, very good. Y'all have a great day, and enjoy your week. Let's see what happens next. See you now.